First of all, I wanted to say thanks to Eddie and Eric and the organizers for putting on this conference. I live in Portland. I also go to a lot of these conferences, and it's super cool to see this conference happening here and people coming pretty far to come to our town, Portland, have an event like this. So yeah, thanks to Eddie. Loving the event so far and the chill vibe we have in this room. Our plan right now is we're going to introduce ourselves, and we're both going to try to answer for ourselves the question that we get a lot, which is, how can you be, or claim to be, a Bitcoiner and an environmentalist? I made my Twitter profile maybe 2.5 years ago, and it says philosopher, which is my day job, environmentalist, Bitcoiner, and I got so much hate from putting those three words together. Most of it from environmental...
From Bitcoin Twitter.
From both. It was like, most of it at the beginning was from environmentalist, how dare you? How dare you? Claim to be an environmentalist. And when you are also promoting something that boils the oceans. And on the Bitcoin side, it also got a lot of the same kind of vitriol, like from that side. Not that Bitcoiners were opposed to the environment, but reject environmentalism itself as a movement, as a kind of attack on freedom or on Bitcoin. So it's a question I've had to think about for a long time. And Margot has too. She's in the same boat. So just a brief intro on me, and then I'll hand it over to Margot, and then we'll go through our sort of high-level philosophies, answers to that question, and then also some kind of case studies in how our ideas manifest in the world. I'm a philosophy professor at Reed College here in Portland. We got some Reed-connected people here. Although this doesn't look like a very reedy crowd to me, I got to say, just coming from our graduation. Reed is commonly called the most progressive college in America. I think we lost that distinction in the Princeton Review like last year to Lewis and Clark, which is also in Portland. So anyway, we're still holding it down as a city. No, my background is I'm a philosophy professor. I've been interested in Bitcoin since 2011, and was really looking for Bitcoin long before 2011, before I found it. And the energy usage of Bitcoin is something that bothered me as soon as I sort of started mining in my own basement with 2 machines, 4 graphics cards each, and just realizing how much power I was drawing, and then sort of doing the math on what if Bitcoin's market cap were to equal the market cap of gold, which was kind of like the craziest idea back then, but now seems very reasonable. And realizing that with a block reward of 50 Bitcoin per block every 10 minutes, some miner was rewarded 50 fresh new Bitcoin, not including fees. And doing the math, I realized that would like use a lot of energy, like maybe more of the energy than we actually produce, or it would incentivize it anyway. And that led me to donate my machines to a nonprofit here in Portland. Some kids got some amazing gaming machines. They teach kids how to program and give them computers. And then I've been thinking about this issue and rethinking it ever since. And it's a hard issue to think through because the energy world is really complex, and the environmental impacts of energy use are really complex. And so, the reason I'm here is because I got pulled into the energy rabbit hole via Bitcoin, and I came to a very different view at the end of that journey than the one where I started. Anyway, that's my backstory.
Okay, hi. I'm Margot Paez. I'm a fellow at the Bitcoin Policy Institute, and I'm also a PhD candidate at Georgia Tech. And my research is actually on Bitcoin mining, both on the energy and environmental impact side. Of course, when I got here, how I got here, it was not to do research And like Troy, I learned about Bitcoin very early on. Unlike Troy, I thought it was just another random internet project. So I really didn't pay attention to it or felt that I needed to do anything with it until about 2018, when I started to see content creators being deplatformed. And so I'm effectively, at the most basic level, a computer nerd, and I started building a platform and integrated BTC Pay server to make it possible for content creators to get around credit card companies when they get deplatformed. So that was how I started taking Bitcoin seriously. But then in 2020 or so, we had the halving and price was going up, and there was more articles being written on the environmental side, and a lot of it sounded really bad. And by that point, I had decided to focus my research on issues related to climate change. So I started to ask myself whether it was ethical for me to hold Bitcoin. So like Troy, I went down this energy mining rabbit hole, and when I came out on the other side, I realized that there was a lot of potential to do good here, that there were all these interesting side effects that seemed somewhat inevitable, and we'll touch into what those are as we go along. And I felt more confident about being involved with Bitcoin. And then I had a different revelation, which was really on the social layer of Bitcoin and on the finance side. And I was thinking about why we struggle with climate inaction. Like, why won't governments take action on climate change? This was all after these massive millions of people movements that were sparked by Fridays for Future and Greta Thunberg. And and I was part
Margot
of that.
was a Fridays for the Future protester, and there are photos of her,
So I'm holding an Extinction Rebellion banner marching through Atlanta, Georgia, I think in 2019. So I was very serious about this, and I was frustrated because we had this great movement, and then it got stymied because of COVID. And I was just sitting in my room one day, just really thinking. I started reading more about economics, and I realized the problem was at the financial layer. We had this issue with financialization, and I went back to the Occupy movement, which I was also involved with. And all of a sudden, I realized, wait a minute, Bitcoin is actually an important tool for us for addressing climate change. It's a vehicle for system change. And so I got really excited and wrote 10,000 words, and that was a financial Hail Mary for the climate, Bitcoin. I think I originally called it Bitcoin adoption, and I think I dropped adoption later on. But that was the idea. It was like, here's this really important tool. And the basic idea is that we need a way to exit this system. And there is only one viable tool out there to do that right now, and that's Bitcoin, and simply because it exists. It's a way to build an economy outside of the economic system that is failing us. And this has to do with fundamental incentives of our financial system, with our money, right? And many of you are probably familiar with this, which is that our financial system and our money system requires and forces us to spend now and not to think about the future, or to save for the future, or to evaluate our present spending in relation to the future. And so those are really bad incentives. And with Bitcoin, because of how it is designed, we have this monetary cap, we can flip those incentives. And you may not believe this, but ecological economists have actually identified this as a problem. So for sustainability's sake, we actually do need to flip those incentives. And so Bitcoin exists outside of the financial system. That's one reason. Two, it flips the incentives. That's another reason. And then the third reason is that you can be your own bank. It's decentralized. You have censorship resistance. You can do whatever you want with it. And that fact that you can control it yourself means that you can pull that value, that financial value, out of the existing system and put it into a new system. And for me, this revelation also came because I had read an academic paper for a course that I was taking in water resources, and it was about socioeconomic collapse. And I'm not talking about apocalyptic collapse. I'm talking about, like livestock was your main form of economic sustaining yourself economically, and now you cannot live off of livestock, and you have to find a new way for your region to survive. And so they basically said, you have to take all capital, all forms of capital, social, monetary, whatever, take it out of the failing system and put it into a new system. And so I took that very literally and was like, yeah, let's do that. Let's take it all out of this system that sucks, that is the cause of climate change and ecological destruction, and let's create a new system, whatever that is, and let's use Bitcoin to do it. So that's why, for me, being a climate activist and also being active in Bitcoin is not a contradiction, because I see Bitcoin as an essential tool for us to solve this issue. And and the climate movement is starting to realize that, but they have not yet gotten that piece, and I have to figure out how to do that.
Yeah, I was thinking for Margot, the question isn't how can you be an environmentalist and a Bitcoiner. It's like, how can you be an environmentalist and a fiatter? Like,
Yes.
this system that we live in, that's problematic. Like, that's not the Bitcoin system. We don't live in the Bitcoin world. We live in the fiat world. That's how we got here. And yeah, lots of resonances between Margot's thoughts on the environment and Jeff Booth's work. It's a system change that we need primarily, and the waste in the system and the accelerated consumption is artificial and has distorted our relationship with nature fundamentally. And to fix that relation, we need to fix the money. I think that's our kind of highest level answer to the question of how can you be a Bitcoiner and an environmentalist is the system we're in is messed up, and Bitcoin represents a different and healthier system, one with intrinsic limits like nature itself. That 21 million cap resembles the cap in real material resources. But Bitcoin is also tied to the physical world, and that's partly how it imposes those real constraints on growth through its ties to the physical world through a process called mining, which is a kind of computation that uses energy, and that's what creates all of the hubbub. It's the use of energy around Bitcoin. And the use of energy itself is really unique. It's really different. And the other high-level thought, and it's kind of a long one, that allows you to sort of grok how Bitcoin relates to the world of energy and the environment, is to understand the contours of this consumer of energy. I like to think of it in biological terms or ecological terms. Bitcoin mining, I compare it to a dung beetle. It uses waste, and it has certain features as a species. It uses a lot of energy, but that energy is of a very different form from the energy that you use as a household or as a city, and it has very, very different effects. So I want to kind of go through the features of the dung beetle that lead to its unique pattern of energy use, and then we can talk about the effects that energy use has. So first of all, I met with somebody earlier this morning who's like a former miner, an ex-miner, Shadrach. Still there, Shadrach's still there. Yeah, an ex-miner. I think there are going to be a lot more ex-miners in the future. Mining is a really hard business. Essentially, the protocol issues, whatever is it now, 450 new Bitcoin per day to miners worldwide. And all miners are chasing that same reward. And if you think about the business of chasing that, basically you're rewarded in Bitcoin in proportion to the computing power that you devote to mining Bitcoin. So if you have 10% of all the computing power in Bitcoin, and there's 450 Bitcoin a day, you should expect to get 45 Bitcoin per day on average. if it is profitable to mine Bitcoin, more people will buy machines and plug them in and mine Bitcoin, so that your percentage that you're getting as a miner will continue to go down until it is no longer profitable to plug in more machines. So it's a unique business in that it has a fungible good. Bitcoin is Bitcoin, same value. It all has the same value. There's no like hand mined boutique custom Portland artisanal Bitcoin. It's just Bitcoin. So you can't get an edge by the nature of your product. You can't get an edge by your location. Like a restaurant, you put it on the right corner and you make it convenient for people at lunch, you get an edge. But Bitcoin is instantly saleable on a global market on the ledger itself of Bitcoin. So you have no locational edge whatsoever. Nobody cares where your Bitcoin came from. So as a business, you have no moat. There is no barrier between you and incoming competitors. And it's in any market like that, you expect the margins to go to zero. That's kind of what the theory predicts, which is why it's a hard market. And there are lots of things miners do to set themselves apart. Specialized firmware or pool strategies or cooling strategies. There are a lot of little edges that people can get. But 70 to 80% of the cost of mining Bitcoin is energy. So all of that, those little tiny differences between miners just basically get erased. And the only thing left is the price of power. And if you don't have cheap power, you're going out of business, because somewhere someone in the world will find cheap power cheaper than yours, and they'll plug in an ASIC and they will drive the hash rate up, and they will drive your proportion of Bitcoin rewards down until you are not profitable. They'll just keep adding machines until you're not profitable, right? That's in the process of happening. It takes a long time to happen, but yeah. Oh, that's the other thing. You use the same machines, buy the same basic processors. They're publicly saleable. So it's kind of like if you were driving for Uber, but everybody drove the same exact model of car. Nobody talked to passengers, you wouldn't expect to make very much money driving for Uber, because people would just keep piling into the business until it was no longer profitable. Okay, that's Bitcoin, but in the most extreme way of anything we've seen. It's the most perfect market of anything we've seen, with this one big differentiator, which is cost of power. And so you would expect Bitcoin mining will find and exploit the cheapest power in the world. And it also helps that Bitcoin mining is scalable. You get some advantage with like a massive data center, but not much. Fundamentally, computing happens at the level of the ASIC. So you can run a profitable mining operation with not a lot of miners if you have super cheap power. It's portable. You can load these things up on a truck or a train or a ship and bring them to the power. This is why mining used to migrate in China between the Inner Mongolia and the Sichuan province during the rainy season. It's portable, it's scalable, it's interruptible. You can shut down your miner in seconds. You can fire it up in seconds. So when power prices are changing radically, you can shut your machine off when the price is high and turn your machine back on when it's low. And Bitcoin is the best consumer of energy at doing that. So that's kind of the high-level picture. An extremely cost-sensitive consumer of energy that is location agnostic, time agnostic, attenuable, interruptible. And so you can predict from that basically that Bitcoin mining will not really compete in the long run with any other consumer of energy. They will always be the lowest bidder in any power market. That's kind of the high level picture of what it is. Everything else. Oh, and one more thought. Fundamentally, what Bitcoin miners do is transform electrical energy into heat. Energy is conserved in physics. No energy is lost. It just takes a different and less useful form. Heat is a less useful form of energy than electricity, and all of the energy entering a Bitcoin miner exits as heat or motion or something else. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Did you want to?
Well, I mean, that also, everything that you described lays into these really cool second order effects that are also relevant to this discussion in terms of where you can place these machines. Like you can co-locate them with renewable energy like wind or solar, which also have similar competitive markets where you're selling pretty much the same product. You're selling electrons and they're all being produced at the same time. And so that can drive down the profits, revenue of these renewable plants. And so if you can co-locate a base revenue stream that can offtake your excess power, you can then be able to be, you can be more profitable, you can build more of these sites, these renewable energy sites, you can make use of whatever tax breaks, tax incentives that are out there that you're not able to because you have this excess power. So we've actually seen this happen, especially in ERCOT, like with Soluna, for example, is a company that is doing this. And there are many other companies that are involved, like Satoshi Energy, Sanga Systems, that work on this side. And then we have, you mentioned the interruptibility. We have Bitcoin miners that are participating in programs called demand response, where they power on and off based on demand. And some of them do that solely based off of the electricity price at that given moment, and they'll power down if it's above their break even. And so that actually helps in two ways. One, it helps with the grid reliability, and it also helps with decarbonization, which we've actually shown in a study that we have been working on and we are publishing soon through the Bitcoin Policy Institute, where if you can be flexible and you can power down at least 40% of the time, you can really maximize the amount of emissions that you're avoiding. And the more flexible you are and the more downtime you can achieve, the more emissions you can avoid compared to a data center, a typical data center that generally has to be up for 99 to 100% of the time. So that has really interesting and important repercussions for grid operators and thinking about meeting climate goals and which types of facilities they want to they should have sited within their grid's jurisdiction. And then Troy, you mentioned also the heat. Right? There's lots of really cool innovative stuff going on with capturing that wasted heat and using it. You can use it to heat at the municipal level. You can install these little chips into these really cool heaters and install those into buildings. And now you've got an ASIC or two hanging on against a wall in your room, and it's it's mining Bitcoin and it's heating your apartment. You can use it for whiskey distilleries and all sorts of things that wherever you think you need that extra heat, you can use it, and it's a very efficient way to do that. And then, of course, methane mitigation, because again, location agnostic, location flexible. You can co-locate these with landfills or livestock farms, making use of the waste. And now you're mitigating methane emissions, which are more potent than carbon dioxide emissions. They're like 80 times more potent over a 20-year period or so, like 27 more times over a 100-year period, right? So these are things like when you're thinking about how can we deal with climate change in a short-term perspective, Bitcoin mining can be really useful if it can profitably co-locate at these sites.
Yeah, I think of there being like sort of three buckets of positive environmental impacts of mining. One is electrifying heating. Since all of these chips are basically resistance heaters that do some computation along the way, I've come to think of normal electrical heaters, resistance heaters, as dumb heaters, because they just create heat, but there's no computation, right? And wherever there's a dumb heater, there should be a smart heater. We'll get computation for free in a physical sense, right? The chip, even though the chip costs something, and to the extent that we can electrify heating from fossil fuel heating, there's a considerable savings in carbon emissions. So that's one bucket. The next bucket is methane mitigation. like Margot said, there's like an 84x warming effect from methane in the short term. Just looking at, say, one company, the biggest company doing methane mitigation, Crusoe Energy, they claim to have mitigated 500,000 metric tons of CO2 in 2022, of CO2e, by burning methane that otherwise would have been flared and burned less efficiently. And going after venting methane in landfills is even more exciting because we're installing gas capture systems and creating energy out of literal waste, total dung beetle behavior. So methane mitigation is the second bucket. And the third bucket is incentivizing intermittent renewables, both their build out, but also just helping them operate. Intermittent renewables are a mixed blessing. They give us really cheap power with a marginal cost of zero because they don't have fuel. They take fuel from sun or from the wind. But they are totally flaky and unreliable. If it's cloudy or if it's not windy, you have a problem. And Bitcoin mining's flexibility is a perfect, hand-in-glove match for that kind of unreliable but cheap power. So those are the kind of three buckets I put these immediate impacts into. Do you want to?
Yeah, there's one more thing. We have to tie it back to the social layer because, you can take all these cool properties, go into the developing world, I guess you could say, in the global south, and you can tie in all of this back to Eileen's talk from HRF, which is you can build out these mini grids, like in Kenya, like what Gridless is doing. And you're solving an energy poverty problem, but you're also solving a human rights problem, and you're doing all of this with energy because one of the UN's human rights that they've identified is access to a standard of living that provides well-being. And in order to do that, you have to have access to energy, you have to have access to electricity and services that are tied to it, right? Like hospitals need to be able to run a lot of equipment that requires electricity, and that's going to bring up your health, longevity. And also something that she mentioned was that she's observed this relationship between poverty and authoritarianism. So if you can build out these energy resources, you can raise that standard of living, and you can bring more freedom, financial freedom, democracy, whatever, to these regions, empower communities in a way that lifts them out of poverty. And you can do that with Bitcoin miners because they can be a buyer of first and last resort because of all of the special qualities that Troy's mentioned. And you can do that with hydro. So we have clean energy on these mini grids, and you can scale that out and have all these mini grids that are able to reach people who the governments and the central electric grid operators, grid companies have not been able to reach. So now you can check off all of these boxes. You're doing something good environmentally, you're doing something good socially, you're empowering people, it's just a really beautiful example, I think.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I think both of us got going down the rabbit hole of Bitcoin and energy is that the standard approach in the media is that there's a trade-off between energy consumption and pollution, energy consumption and destroying the environment. Just like we think of energy as a resource, and you're either wasting or exploiting that resource, or you're preserving or conserving it. And that is just the wrong way to think about electricity. First of all, because energy is abundant in our world around us in all these different forms. And some of electrical generation is just changing the form and availability and use of that energy. And so it's possible to have more abundance and to have at the same time a better climate impact or environmental impact, right? I mean, I looked at the Cambridge electricity Bitcoin electricity consumption index this morning and to see where we are in the country ranking. I think right now we're using like as much as Poland. Poland was Alex DeVries. Ukraine was the Cambridge one, and that framing of thinking about it like as the same as a country or comparing it to households is completely misleading. Because Ukraine uses power on its own terms. It's not a flexible consumer of energy that can just turn off and on when power is cheap or when it's available. I can't use it anywhere in the world. It's not location agnostic. It's just adding demand. Whereas Bitcoin, it's a non-rival consumer, and at the same time, it can incentivize new energy build out that benefits ordinary people who don't have access to energy. I think that's what, the environmental community has yet to grasp, that the tension between environmentalism and an abundance mindset and energy, ending energy poverty, they are compatible actually, and we have to extricate ourselves from the trap that we have to choose between these two. We don't. We have to be clever about it. We have to be careful about it. And Bitcoin is weirdly one of these tools that makes that apparent.
Troy and Margot, everybody. I really appreciate you guys, and as a Bitcoin miner myself, all that you're talking about is near and dear to my heart, especially here in Oregon. It's wonderful to hear your perspective on it. I often say to people that Bitcoin mining is the most misunderstood force for good in our world, especially for environmentalists. With that, guys, we're going to take some questions for Troy and Margot.
I had an experience going to a server farm out in Reno, and there was a lot of carbon emissions from that. And I don't know that y'all mentioned specifically carbon. And so I'm curious if, when you're talking about stagnant energy and methane and all these different things, if carbon is also something that can be used within this framework or context, or if that's different.
Could I ask how there were emissions at the server farm?
So at the server farm, when you think about, it's so much energy, right? And so it's super hot. And this one place that I toured called The Switch has won a tremendous number of awards because of the cooling process, the way that they recycle the energy, they help cool it, and it helps to provide a certain amount of cooling for homes in Reno. Like it's a whole environmental process that they've narrowed down. It just made me think about the amount of energy that does come from mining, and I get the benefit that y'all are talking about. I'm also just trying to understand when they were talking about carbon emissions from the server farm, where that factors in within this conversation.
Well, there's like scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions, and it's worth saying that Bitcoin has 0 scope 1 emissions. It doesn't actually produce, the process of mining doesn't literally and locally produce any carbon emissions at all. But it uses energy, and the production of that energy emits carbon if it comes from, say, burning fossil fuels, those scope 2 emissions. So yeah, server farms all have scope 2 emissions if they're using power from the grid, and the grid has, say, natural gas and coal powering it. So Bitcoin mining has a carbon footprint, it's true, and it's non-zero. Part of our research is quantifying the difference between a server farm like that, which requires 99.9% uptime, and Bitcoin miners, which our data shows shut down between 69% of the time and 31% of the time and 5% of the time. And particularly when the grid is stressed and you shut down, you avoid a lot of carbon, and we're quantifying that avoided carbon by using marginal emissions factors from the local substation where those miners are pulling power from. So I mean, my short answer would be, in the scope 2 sense, Bitcoin mining does have a carbon impact, and that's part of its environmental profile. But that impact is considerably less than a standard data center, considerably less because of its flexibility.
I just didn't know if there was anything that was usable.
Is the carbon usable? Carbon is really hard to use chemically. The heat thing you're talking about.
Direct air capture.
Direct air capture. Wildly enough, okay, coming to the heat stuff, the ways that heat is being used right now is utterly mind-blowing. Something that Margot and I get is we get pitched all of these interesting kind of ideas on the edge. And you can use the cooling and the heat from Bitcoin mining to do carbon capture and make carbon capture cheaper, like direct air carbon capture, and there's companies doing that. There's another company that we work with that's using the heat from Bitcoin mining to purify water, literally like put water under negative pressure so that it boils at a lower than 100 degrees, and then using that, using the heat from the chip with a special coupling device to heat water and get it to evaporate, and so ultimately get distilled water out of water from Bitcoin mining. Totally shocking and awesome things. And another person we just talked to, who works in the Department of Energy in the geothermal unit, is talking about storing heat seasonally underground and bringing it back up for heating in the winter for the district heating or whatever. So there's a tremendous amount of innovation around the heating sides happening in the data center space, but Bitcoin, I think, is leading that innovation. And this is another way that Bitcoin is environmentally friendly, is that it's, because it's such a competitive business and every edge is needed, if you can monetize heat, it can give you the edge over your competitors. So we're seeing it leading in innovation, across the whole range of the business.
Yeah, and that heating also can offset emissions because you don't have to use natural gas to heat in that case.
In terms of Bitcoin miners incentivizing green and renewable energy projects, since they're buyers of first resort when these projects come online, making them profitable, and then they're also buyers of last resort, say like with wind at night when it's not being used and they can't store that. What do you feel like is the biggest, this logic seems extremely simple and like first grade to me. What do you think is the biggest problem that we face as an industry in terms of getting policymakers and decision makers to be able to understand such basic logic?
The toxic image, I would say.
I mean, I don't think it's right now profitable to mine on solar in the US. And I think this is because there are incentives to do other things with the solar right now from the IRA. Like the IRA passage kind of killed the idea of solar mining in the US. It makes sense in other places, but not so much here right now, because you get paid more to like make hydrogen with that extra solar or.
I mean, but there are. I mean, there's like Satoshi Energy sets up PPAs, these special PPAs between solar farms and wind farms and Bitcoin miners. So it is possible, but what they do is whatever they're not getting from the solar farm or wind farm, they then pull from the grid.
They're hybrid operations.
So it's hybrid, yeah. So that's what we see right now. But in terms of policymakers, really Bitcoin has a really bad image. And in terms of the environmental side, because of all the FUD, and that has really made it very difficult to get them to believe that any of this is possible, which is why we went and got data, because we wanted to say, well, here's proof. You don't have to take anybody's word for it. You can actually see the numbers. They don't lie.
Yeah, and the other thing is, we just have so many awesome entrepreneurs in this area who are just building and doing stuff. And the best thing we can do is, we can work at the academic level, but it's also just pointing at real projects. I'm working with a business that's doing solar installations where they over-provision solar on rooftops in a very high-priced electricity market in San Diego. Give rent the roof for 30 years, give the homeowner 25% discount from the cheapest utility rate, sell the power to the homeowner, but when the homeowner's not using power, power a miner in the garage and get the sats from that. And there are projects kind of like that in South Africa, for instance. And we just build these things out. And of course, we have a Bitcoiner in Oklahoma, just mining purely on solar, completely off grid. I shouldn't say it's impossible. I'm relaying what a solar developer told me, but it is happening, right? We just ultimately knowledge lags reality. The academy lags really far behind. Even the industry, large businesses, they also lag, and it is ultimately entrepreneurs at the front lines answering your question by just like going out and doing it. And then we have case studies.
Sticking on the subject over here of what policymakers need to hear as it relates to, Bitcoin not being the end of the environment. I just learned that one of the reasons that Jeff Merkley is one of our congressional representatives here in Oregon, and for those who don't know, the FIT 21 bill just barely passed the House and is headed over to the Senate. Still many hurdles to go, and this is relevant here, which is that Jeff Merkley's big opposition right now is this exact concern, that Bitcoin is bad for the environment. And, as folks in this room may also know, Greenpeace has been somewhat weaponized against Bitcoin lately, and that's a good strategy if you're against Bitcoin, in my opinion. I'm curious, are there organizations like Greenpeace that are on the side of Bitcoin that Jeff Merkley should be hearing from, in addition to just Bitcoin advocates? I could imagine Jeff wanting to hear from someone that he might see as credible from the environmental space, carrying a Bitcoin flag in addition to Bitcoin advocates. Do those organizations exist? Who would you recommend that we support as an alternative to someone like Greenpeace?
I don't know of any environmental organization that supports Bitcoin. Do you, Troy?
I thought it was really telling when we saw a letter from 70 different environmental organizations to Congress condemning Bitcoin's environmental impact. The only paper that they cited in support of its environmental impact was this Mora et al. Paper from 2018, paper that has been debunked 3 times in the same journal within the same year it was published. None of those organizations did so much as they didn't so much as click on the article itself where they would see the refutations there. So I think that for me, I was just in shock for days after that, having actually given money to some of those organizations, and realizing that no one's doing their homework. I'm an academic. Like we check our sources. Like we're not just talking heads. Like we actually do real research. We work hard. And I realized that there was just a social contagion thing going on. Nobody wanted to be alone. Everybody wanted to be on board. And so who can Jeff Merkley talk to? I don't know. I've written him. I haven't liked what I've gotten back from him. BPI would love to talk to him. We're Bitcoin Policy Institute. I'm sure Dennis is here somewhere. Dennis would love to talk to him, probably has talked to him probably many times at Stoshi Action. Ron Wyden, on the other hand, is an incredible advocate for privacy and privacy tech in Oregon. He's a Democrat who's been stalwart against the Warren wing of his party in support of, I would say, philosophically aligned Bitcoin ideals. So yeah, it's complicated, just like this bill just narrowly passing, right? Even in this state, we're split too.
Troy and Margot, everybody.
Thank you.